some of you may be attending an ordination for the first time, and I think it's natural to wonder, well, what is it all about? Why do people get ordained? Um, so I think the simple answer to that is to be happy. So the Dalai Lama and all the Tibetan lamas, when they teach, they often start with that sentence that all living beings want to be happy. And it's kind of a simple idea, but it may not be something we normally think about. But when we do think about it, I think we can recognize that it's true. Um, so this is very much a Buddhist idea that every human being and also other beings like animals, insects, birds, we just wish to be happy. We don't want suffering. We don't want pain. We don't want any harm coming to us. You know, that's a universal attitude. You can see animals, birds, insects, and of course human beings. If we are threatened, if there's any sense of a threat to our life or to our health, to our happiness, we get frightened and try to escape, try to run away from that. So it's clear if we look, if we think about it, that nobody wants pain or suffering. And the opposite is the case, that we want happiness. And happiness doesn't necessarily mean whoopee, this really excited feeling, but just having our basic needs fulfilled. We have stomachs, they get hungry, and it's not a pleasant experience. So everybody wants food when their stomach is empty. And when we get thirsty, we want something to drink. So again, we can see this as universal. All people, all living beings, we want that kind of our basic needs fulfilled. And when we do have those needs fulfilled, we're happy. Animals are so happy when they get fed, and they're not happy when they don't get fed. So that's very clear. So Buddhism talks about that, and also the idea in Buddhism is that everyone deserves to be happy. Yeah, it's like a human right. It's like a sentient being right, not just human beings, but sentient beings. We all deserve to be happy, and nobody should have to suffer. And so that's kind of a basic idea, and also a way of living. It forms the way of living in Buddhism, that we really try the best we can to live according to that, to recognize, to acknowledge every living being's wish to be happy and to not suffer. And we try to live our life in that way, that we don't cause suffering to any living being, and try to help them if they are suffering, try to relieve their suffering, and then do what we can to bring them happiness. But we ourselves want to be happy. Yeah, it's just like a really deep instinctive wish that we have to experience happiness. And so I think that's at the root of a wish to get ordained. But to understand, well, how does the wish to be happy lead to being ordained? Maybe it's helpful to look at the Buddha's experience, because when we get ordained, we are emulating the Buddha. We are following in the Buddha's footsteps, because this is what he did. So even though Buddha lived a long time ago and in a far distant land, his life was not that different from ours. He was born into and raised in a royal family. Sometimes they call his father a king, and he was called a prince. So his father was a kind of ruler, and he was the child of that ruler. So he was expected to, take over the ruling of the country when his father passed away. So he was raised in a very comfortable situation, the best that was available at that time in terms of living accommodations and clothing and food and everything. So everything comfortable and pleasant was available to him. But when he was still a young man, he became aware of unpleasant aspects of life. It's said that his father actually mm, wanted to ensure that his son would follow in his footsteps and become the ruler when he passed away. And at the time that the Buddha was born, at that time he was not called the Buddha, but Siddhartha, Prince Siddhartha. So it was customary to consult sages, wise people when a child is born, especially the child of an important person like the king. And the sage would look at the child and they make some certain prophecies. So the sages who did look at Prince Siddhartha when he was born said that he would either become a great ruler or he would become a great saint. His father wasn't too happy about the second idea, the second option. He wanted his child to be a ruler, not a saint. And so that was one reason for him trying to, protect his son and guide him in that direction. Nevertheless, Siddhartha did become aware of aspects of life that were painful, such as sickness and aging and death. And these very much affected him. He thought about how, wow, this is what happens to human beings. We get sick, we get old, and eventually we die. And he really thought a lot about this, and it diminished his sense of pleasure, and previously, he was always surrounded by beautiful people, young people, musicians, dancers, delicious food, and so on. So kind of a very pleasurable life, a bit like ours, I think, when we're teenagers and in our 20s, we want to enjoy as much as we can. But now he started, after realizing, what happens to human beings as they go through life, he thought, wow, what's the point of all this pleasure? We're all going to get sick and old and die. And then he had an encounter with a mendicant. There were, and still today in India, many, many people who give up their ordinary life and follow a spiritual life, and that often means just being homeless, wandering around, begging for their food, and practicing meditation or doing various kinds of practices in order to transform their mind and be free of suffering. So the Buddha saw such a person and was really struck by this person's calmness and peacefulness, and also had this sparkle in his eye that showed he was very happy in spite of the fact that he was kind of dressed in rags and, just a wandering mendicant. And so that led the prince to contemplate that lifestyle and think, yeah, I would really like to engage in spiritual practice and find a way to end suffering, not just for himself, but for others as well. He thought, if I can find a way out of suffering, a way to end the suffering of life, then I can help others to do the same. And so this was his motivation for leaving home against his family's wishes and take up that kind of life. So he left and went into the forest and gave up his princely garb for just sort of raggedy robes, and then spent 6 years in the forest, sometimes with other mendicants, sometimes with teachers, learning what they taught and meditating on what they taught. But hadn't yet managed to find what he was seeking. And then finally, at the end of this 6-year period of what's called austerities, he really practiced hard. The story is that he was eating just 1 grain of rice a day for I don't know how long, and so his body just became really emaciated. His bones were sticking out, and he almost died. But then he realized, no, this isn't the way. Abusing my body, not taking care of my health and my body, this is not getting me where I want to go. So then he started eating again, nourishing food. And that gave him renewed strength, renewed energy. And then he went to what's now called Bodh in northern India, sat beneath a tree, which is now called a Bodhi tree. I don't know if it was called a Bodhi tree before, but because it was the tree under which the Buddha attained enlightenment, Bodhi means enlightenment, then it became known as the Bodhi tree. So he sat under this tree and made this kind of promise, I'm not going to get up until I reach my goal of enlightenment, complete end of all suffering. So he meditated through the night. His mind went through various experiences, attained various realizations, and he finally did achieve what he was seeking, the state of enlightenment or awakening. And it's difficult to really understand enlightenment. They say you have to be there to really know what it's all about. But a sort of simple way of explaining it is to look at the Tibetan word for Buddha, which is part of my name, Sangye. So the first part of my name is Sangye. And Sangye is the Tibetan term for Buddha. And it has two syllables. Sang is the first part. Sang has a sense of being pure. So a Buddha is someone who's totally pure of all negative aspects of mind, like greed, hatred, ignorance, pride, jealousy. So all the sort of disturbing and afflictive things in our mind, a Buddha has totally removed those, is totally free from those. They never arise in the Buddha's mind. And then the second part of the term gye has the sense of expanded or increased, and that refers to the positive qualities of the mind. So we all have some negative qualities, but we also have good qualities such as compassion and love and generosity and the wish to help others and wisdom. So there's certain positive qualities that we have, but in our case, well, my case anyway, they're limited. Like, I feel love sometimes, but not all the time. Some people, but not everybody. So our qualities, positive qualities, may be in a limited state. But in the case of a Buddha, an enlightened being, they have been developed fully such that they are like perfected, completely pure, and always there, always present. So like love or loving kindness in the mind of a Buddha is constantly there for every living being, without exception, not leaving out anybody, even terrorists and murderers and rapists, people who do awful things, and it's not easy to love them. But in the mind of a Buddha, there's only love for every single living being, all the time. It's never off, it's always on. And the same with the other positive qualities. They're fully developed and purified and perfected. So that just gives us a rough idea of what it means to be a Buddha, or to be awakened, to be enlightened. It means one is free of everything negative, painful, disturbing, and fully developed and perfected in everything positive, all the positive qualities and abilities and so on. And so another thing about being a Buddha or an enlightened being is they reach that state not just for their own sake, but for the sake of everyone else, to be able to help all other living beings. So that's the real goal, is helping others. And so then after the Buddha reached that state, attained enlightenment, he spent the rest of his life, he lived to about 80. So I think he taught for about 45 years. And taught people, anyone who was willing to listen and help them. And many of his followers also attained a state of liberation or enlightenment, or various stages up to that point. So he benefited many people during his lifetime. And then still today, many people are benefiting from the Buddha's teachings because they've been kept alive and passed down from teacher to disciple, and so they're still alive today. Um, so, so for some of us, when we learn about the Buddha's teachings, we feel inspired. Like in my own case, um, I was raised Catholic. My family was Catholic, and but when I was still, I don't know, maybe a teenager, I felt this isn't right for me. There were too many things I found difficult to accept, or even contradictory, and so I began searching elsewhere, and eventually came to Buddhism, and really liked the Buddha's teachings. And I think the thing that really attracted me the most was this whole idea of becoming enlightened to benefit all living beings. And I mean, it takes time to get there. It's not something you can do overnight or even in a couple of years. It may take a number of lifetimes. But while working towards enlightenment, you yourself are becoming a happier person. I can definitely say that. And your good qualities like kindness and compassion are growing more and more. And so you're able to benefit others in this lifetime. So you don't have to wait till you're enlightened to help others. You can help others on your way to enlightenment. And so for me, that idea was just so beautiful. And I thought, after learning about that, nothing else could be better. Yeah, I couldn't imagine anything better than that, anything to do with my life that's more meaningful and more beneficial than that. And so I jumped on board. And when I was very young, like maybe 5 years old, I thought about becoming a nun, a Catholic nun, because my grandmother gave me a book about Saint Teresa of Lisieux, a French saint who lived in the 1800s. Anyway, not too long ago. And she was just a really amazing person. As a child, even, she was very, very virtuous and very devoted to God, and really, really, really wanted to be a nun. And they had a law, a rule that you had to be 15 to be a nun, but she was begging them to let her enter the convent, so they agreed when she was 14. So she was just like a very amazing, wonderful, saintly person. And so I had this thought, oh yeah, I'd like to be like her. I'd like to be a nun and devote my life to God. But then, as I got older, I kind of realized I wasn't really saint material. I had too much anger and selfishness, and yeah, it didn't look like I could emulate her. But there was probably some seed in there, some, the idea of a religious life, a contemplative life, a life dedicated to, yeah, practicing some spiritual path was still there. So then when I encountered Buddhism, and I went to India. I was in Dharamsala, and met the Dalai Lama and many other lamas, and I just felt really comfortable in the presence of people with robes on. And so I think, yeah, this old seed was still there, and I had this wish to be like them, to live like them. So I was very fortunate that I was able to do that fairly young, and yeah, and I have no regret. I think it's been a really wonderful life. So, yeah, so as I said in the beginning, I think the reason to be ordained is to be happy oneself, because I wasn't very happy. I was a very unhappy person, and I thought, the Buddha's teachings seemed to be something that would help me to be more happy, and that's definitely the case. But not just happiness for oneself, but for others, to dedicate oneself for others. So one of my teachers, Lama Yeshe, in one of his early talks to his Western disciples who were getting ordained, he said, the right attitude for being a monk or a nun is giving up serving just one person, me, and serve the majority, all sentient beings, as much as possible. Yeah, so most people in the world, yeah, they're looking out for number one. And you may achieve a certain amount of happiness and sense of fulfillment by looking out for yourself and your own small circle of family and friends. But when you open your heart to more people, more beings, and like I say, in Buddhism, we regard all beings, all sentient beings, as deserving of our love and our compassion and our care. So, I mean, it's hard to do. You have to work at it, but working on that and living your life in that way, it really does bring a great deal of happiness. You know, when you care about others and reduce self-centeredness as much as possible, increase altruism as much as possible, it really does bring a lot of happiness and peace and a sense of meaning in life. But of course, to be able to help others, we do have to work on ourselves, because most of us have aspects of our mind that are not so conducive for helping others. I mean, I can certainly say for myself, there's still a lot of selfishness and anger, irritation, and attachment and greed and jealousy and so on. So those kind of things still come up in the mind. But Buddhism has a lot of methods, a lot of tools to work on those and learn to manage them and learn to reduce them. And they do work. I can say with 100% conviction, they do work. And so we can't immediately get rid of those negative states of mind. I remember when I was first ordained, I really wanted to stop being angry and greedy and selfish. And I was thinking, I just want these things to stop. But they didn't. Sometimes it almost seemed like they were increasing. But I think that's not the case. I think that was just becoming more aware of them and more having a greater sense of, I don't want these kind of thoughts in my mind. I don't want these kind of attitudes in my life. But I had to learn slowly that it takes time. You can't force yourself to change. But slowly, slowly, by learning and contemplating and meditating and practicing, then those negative aspects of the mind and of one's character do decrease. And you at least learn how to manage them so they're not just taking over your mind, hijacking your mind, and causing you to act them out in ways that are hurtful. So a big part of being ordained is working on oneself, working on one's mind, which is why, like here in the Abbey, every day there's periods of meditation, and also there's teachings, and people have time to study. So by learning and thinking, meditating, one is able to gradually learn how to reduce the negative aspects of the mind. And then living in a community is really helpful as well for a number of reasons. We have vows or precepts that we try to live by, which include celibacy and not taking intoxicants of any kind, and not stealing and not lying and cheating and so on. And, we may have done some of those things before we got ordained. And so there's this tendency, to do those things. And when you're out in the world, if you were living in an ordinary situation with people who are doing those things, then we might continue doing them as well. Because we're so easily influenced by the people we spend time with, the people around us. So we see them doing things and we think, well, I can do that too. And so if you're trying to live as a monk or a nun in an ordinary situation, like I've done that. Actually, I've spent quite a bit of time living in cities, in apartments, not with other ordained people. And it is more difficult in that kind of situation because you don't have people around you who are living the same lifestyle as you. They're living in different ways. And yeah, I mean, we just kind of find ourselves, well, I want to be like them, or I should be like them. I want to be accepted by them, so I should behave like them too. So these kind of attitudes can come up, and then it becomes challenging, becomes difficult to keep the vows or the precepts that we've taken. Whereas living in a community with others, like here, the majority of people are monks and nuns, or other nuns and monks. Majority are nuns. But anyway, we do have basically the same precepts, the same vows. And so we're trying to live this similar kind of lifestyle, not killing, not stealing, not lying, not cheating, not taking intoxicants, drugs, alcohol, and so on, and not getting involved in romantic and sexual relationships. And so living in such a situation, it's easier. It's still difficult to keep the vows or the precepts, but it's much easier when everybody around you is living that way too. So, and also everyone here is trying very hard to work on their minds and not just explode with anger when they feel like it, or take things that they shouldn't be taking, and so on. And so the situation is very conducive for reducing our afflictive emotions, recognizing them when they do come up, and then working on them to reduce them. Any questions that anyone has about being ordained, being a monk or nun?
You mentioned that you had ordained at an early age. How long ago was that?
48 years.
That's amazing. I just want to congratulate
Yeah,
you.
I just turned 22 when I got ordained. Yeah. So I was kind of young. And I feel grateful for that, because I think, the longer you spend with certain habits, the harder it is to change. So I think when you want to, start working on your habits and changing your habits, it's better to do it when you're younger rather than older. If I was ordaining at 60, it would be much harder to change myself. But yeah. But I was also incredibly naive and idealistic. And I had kind of illusions about getting enlightened in a very short time, and had to learn the hard way that, yeah, it's not that easy. It does take time.
Having experienced, the time before the Abbey and living at the Abbey, I'm wondering if there's any advice for us lay people that are around monastics, not in a community, and how to support them so that it doesn't feel like they're being pulled away from their vows or not part of a community, but also supporting them, and any advice there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm trying to think of those situations where I was living amongst lay people and not having any community of ordained people around me. What would have been helpful? Um, but I think it also depends on individuals. Each person has their own individual personality and likes and dislikes and so on. And like in my own case, I always felt the need to have time to myself. And that was particularly challenging when I lived in Singapore, because I sometimes felt I was expected to always be on and always be with people. And but at least I did have a private living space, so I could always retreat there. But yeah, I think you need to be sensitive to each ordained person's needs, and try to support them. And many of us have practices, different kinds of prayers and practices that we need to do every day. And so it's important to have the time and space to be able to do those. But yeah, I think probably the best thing would be to just openly communicate. If you do have an ordained person living in Vajrapani, for example, Just have a talk with them and say, I really want to support you in your practice and in your life as an ordained person. Please tell me what I can do to help. So that would probably be the best thing rather than trying to guess or assume, which might not match what the person really does want or need. I mean, some people are very outgoing and they want to spend more time with the community. So yeah, I think that would be the best thing. But yeah, I mean, also one other thought that comes up, since many of us were, we weren't ordained since we were children, so we had our own life, and probably many of us did drink and take drugs and maybe even smoke before getting ordained, and so there could still be some, a feeling of wanting to do that. And so it could be challenging if there are people around this ordained person who are taking drugs or drinking and smoking. And so, yeah, just to be sensitive to that and try to ask people, if you want to do that stuff, do it somewhere else, not in front of this ordained person. That might be hard at Vajrapani, but um, yeah. Also, just like in terms of communication, when I was living in Singapore, I was living in an apartment, and there were other Western people in the apartment building, and there was one guy. He drank a lot and also smoked. And sometimes when I was, you know, going home to my apartment, he'd be outside and would want to get into a conversation with me, and I just found it so difficult talking to somebody who's intoxicated. You can't really have a I don't know, the kind of conversation I like to have anyway with somebody when they're intoxicated. So that was something I found challenging. Those are just a few things that come to my mind.
Thank you.
Having been ordained so long and now coming to live at Sravasti Abbey, how do you hold your role as one of the elders and kind of like guiding this growing Sangha here?
Well, I guess in the beginning, I've been here a couple of years now, I was just trying to get a sense of the community and how things ran, and also the individual personalities here. So I was kind of just staying back and looking and watching and, and so on. And then as time went on, I did become more knowledgeable, more familiar with how things are run here, and could kind of be more involved in the community. And I was also asked to do more things like teaching and being involved in ordination ceremonies and so on. So I guess according to my personality, I tend to be more introverted rather than extroverted, and also a bit cautious. So like I said, I just kind of want to get a feel of the situation and the people, and see where and how I can fit in. So I tend to wait to be asked to do things rather than volunteer, like being a mentor to a younger ordained person. I just feel it would be more appropriate to wait until I'm asked to do that rather than put myself in that position. That's my way of doing things, my way of being. So yeah, I'm happy to help as much as I can. And I mean, what a few people have mentioned to me privately is they're just happy to have me here. Just my being here in the community with so many years of experience as an ordained person, they find that inspiring. So that's nice to hear. Just being here and doing my thing is helpful to people. But otherwise, yeah, I would prefer to wait until I'm invited or asked to take some role.
At the Abbey, I guess the drinking and smoking is obvious, but I wonder what other ways lay people can support the monastics here.
I think everyone's doing really well. I mean, the lay people who come here, the lay people who are outside, but sending donations or sending messages of support. I can't really imagine them doing more than they're already doing. That's my perception. Somebody else might have something else to say, but I'm just, in fact, I have to say, when many years ago, when I heard that I've known Venerable Children since, I don't know, 1975 or 1976, something like that. So we're old friends. And when I heard that she was starting this abbey, I was a little concerned. I thought, what, Eastern Washington? I've never been here before, but I kind of imagined it wouldn't be, it's a bit like cowboy country here. And not many Buddhists. So I kind of wondered how it was going to work. And also her wish to have the ordained people here live, not go shopping themselves, but just receive donations from of food and so forth. I thought, well, good luck. I mean, in Asia, there's so many Buddhists, so many people who are Buddhists, and they really admire the monks and nuns, and they're happy to make offerings, provide food, and whatever else is needed. But I thought, this area? So I was really, I was amazed when I heard that it's working. And that I remember that at one point they were raising funds for one of the buildings. I don't know if it was this one or Gautami. And when I looked at the amount of money that was needed, I thought, ooh, that's going to be difficult. But they did it. And so it's just so beautiful, so wonderful to see that there are people wanting to support the monastery, to provide food for the Sangha, to provide volunteer help for forest work or garden work or building work or whatever, to send donations. I mean, it's just beautiful. I really didn't believe it would be possible to do it in the West. Because traditionally, in Asia, monks and nuns don't own property, in some places, they don't even touch money. They don't go shopping. And they just live on what is donated to them. But I thought that would be very hard to do in the West because there's just there aren't many Buddhists, many lay Buddhists who would be willing to do that. So I'm just amazed and delighted that it's working here and that we're getting even more than we need. I remember during the pandemic, the first year of the pandemic, we were in lockdown, so there were no volunteers coming in. It was just a small group of us here. And there were people writing and saying, "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" And we'd get these, packages of toilet paper and food. And, we kind of had more than we actually needed. So that was just so beautiful to see that. And also the people's joy, that the lay people are actually, they're not doing this out of a sense of obligation and, oh, I don't really want to do it, but I have to. But joyful. Yeah, sometimes when we have the offering ceremony here, like people bring food and we put it up there, like right now. And then after lunch, we have these verses that we recite to each other. So I remember sometimes people would be crying. The lay people are crying, as they're offering this food. I thought, wow, that's so beautiful. Because I know for myself, generosity is a beautiful thing. It was always hard for me. When I was young, I was very stingy, maybe my Scottish ancestry, but it was very hard for me to give. And then that's one of the things I enjoyed living in Asia. People there are very generous, and that helped me to be more generous as well and experience the joy of giving. So I've seen that for myself, that, yeah, giving is really beautiful. It's really full, a source of joy and happiness when you're providing something needed by and beneficial to others. So that's a bit of a long answer to your question, but from my point of view, I think what the lay people are doing is just amazing, and I couldn't ask for more.
And well, what advice would you give new monastics like myself?
Did you say new monastics?
Well, I'm fairly new. Yes.
You're not so new.
I feel new.
Relatively new. What advice? That's a big question. Stick with it. Yeah. It's not an easy life. I mean, but what I've said to myself, there have been times when I've thought of giving it up because it was hard, but I'm glad I didn't. And what I realized was there's no life that's easy. Whatever you do, it's going to be difficult. I remember once, I think I was living in Australia and I was meeting with a group of women who were asking me questions about being ordained. And I said, yeah, one of the most difficult things is loneliness, you know. And one of the women immediately said, even if you're married, you can still be lonely. And that was kind of an eye opener, but I'm sure it's quite true. Of course, it depends on your partner, but yeah, I mean, if your partner is spending a lot of time away, and even when they're there, maybe they're not really giving you as much attention as you needed. So just even married and having children, there could still be experiences of loneliness. And here, like, yeah, almost no time to be lonely or a chance to be lonely. There's so many people around and doing things together all the time. Um, so whatever lifestyle you live, whatever you do in your life, there will be difficulties. There will be challenges. There's no perfect, easy life. But what I can say about this life is that it's fulfilling. It gives you a sense of meaning and purpose. You're doing something beneficial for yourself and for others. Um, so yeah, if you do ever face difficulties or challenges or have doubts about wanting to continue, talk to people. Talk to those who are more experienced and yeah, discuss your doubts, discuss your concerns, get help. And in Buddhism itself, in the Buddhist teachings, there's so many methods or tools you can use, whatever kind of difficulty you face, whatever difficulties or challenges, whether it's with another person in a relationship or just within yourself or physical problems, whatever kind of problem you may face in life, there's all these methods or tools that you can use to deal with that situation and even make it part of your practice so that your spiritual qualities and your understanding, your realizations grow and develop by going through that experience. That's one of the most wonderful aspects of the Buddha's teachings, the whole idea of using problems in the path, transforming problems into the spiritual path. It's like, oh, here's a problem. It doesn't have to get you down. It doesn't have to make you miserable. You can use it to spiritually grow and be happy. You just have to use it. That's the thing. Sometimes it takes a while before you get around to using it. You spend a bit of time moping and sulking and being unhappy and being depressed, and then you think, oh, I don't have to do this. I can do something else. Let's try that. Well, that works much better. I thought it would be nice to just spend some time rejoicing in what's happening today. Stephen has been contemplating this for quite a few years and has finally made the decision to take this step. And I was thinking today, getting ordained is a little bit like getting married. Not exactly, but there's some similarities. Because when people get married, you have this incredible love for the other person. You want to commit yourself to living with that person and being kind and loving and enjoying, experiencing joy and love in your life. And so a wedding is like a very joyous occasion. The couple getting married are very joyful, and their family and friends are very joyful. So in the case of getting ordained, we're not marrying another person, but we are making a commitment to a particular way of life that we find meaningful and beneficial and will enable us to have more good qualities, more love, more compassion, more generosity and wisdom and joy. So let's just spend some time contemplating that in the case of Stephen, who we've all known for a long time, and just really feel joy in what he's doing.